For thousands of Milwaukee's poorest residents,
that a driver's license is essential.
a traffic ticket can snowball,
One ticket rolls and keep rolling.
putting a valid license out of reach.
Almost put in a situation where you have no other alternative but to drive.
This week on Open Record,
When more people have licenses, it's safer for our entire community.
an effort to get suspended and revoked drivers back on the road legally.
Proud owner of my first license.
It's a roadblock,
The demand exceeds the capacity that we have.
making it harder to separate reckless drivers from those who are simply driving while poor. From the Fox 6 Studios, this is Open Record. I am Brian Polson, and I'm here with Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
And we are joined by Contact 6's Jenna Sachs. Welcome back again, Jenna.
No problem.
We are recording this episode on Wednesday, October 9th, 2024, and for about the past 5 years, one of the most persistent, and it's maybe more than that, I would say, one of the most persistent public policy issues in the Milwaukee area has been reckless driving. Some of the most dangerous drivers on the road are those who continue to drive with a suspended or revoked license. We've talked about that extensively on this podcast, but this week we're going to flip the script a little bit, and we're going to talk about a subset of suspended and revoked drivers who are not especially dangerous. Their greatest crime may be poverty. And in an effort to help get them back on the street, that effort is hitting a familiar dead end. We'll talk about that when we come back after the break. And welcome back to Open Record. According to the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, there are more than 580,000 licensed drivers in Milwaukee County, and about 22,000 of them, roughly 4%, have suspended or revoked or canceled licenses. But of course, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not driving. An effort to help those drivers get legal behind the wheel is having success, but on a very small scale. And it's something we haven't talked a lot about when we talk about the larger issue of unlicensed, suspended, and revoked drivers, but it's certainly one that's out there.
So in your story, you took us to a place called the Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability. What is that? What does it serve, and how is that central to this?
So it's actually an organization that's been around a long time. If it goes back, I think 17 years, around 2007, and under its current leadership within Wisconsin Community Services, it's been about 14 years. It's an organization that was started, and I believe one of the people who was a driving force behind it is a former Milwaukee municipal judge, Jim Gramling. And the idea was that there are people out there who are getting caught in this cycle of maybe you or I get a traffic ticket, and it's not, we're not reckless driving, we're not weaving in and out of traffic, we're not going 30 miles an hour over, but you get a ticket and you get a fine, and what do? You pay the ticket.
Pay it.
But if you can't afford to pay the ticket, or if you go paying that ticket means it's either that or groceries, or it's that or rent, what do I do? So you find people who go, I'm just not going to pay it.
So these aren't people who have ticket after ticket after ticket.
Not all of them.
Okay.
There are some who have a series of tickets, but in many cases, the people coming to this organization, this group to get help, are those who don't have an insurmountable path back to getting a license, but it feels overwhelming to them. Maybe they've let those things snowball, and now they have a series of tickets and unpaid fines, and they're in multiple jurisdictions, and they go, it just feels overwhelming. There's no way I could ever drive legally again. So what's the point? Just keep driving illegally. And there's the question that's raised by that, and I think it's one that's an interesting push and pull, is does that make someone a riskier driver? Maybe you have nothing to lose. I don't have a license to lose, so who cares if I get stopped again? Some might argue that you don't want to get stopped again because maybe you're more cautious because you're feeling that, the police department over your shoulder, someone looking over you. But I've heard many say it's the opposite, that you have someone who, if there's nothing to lose, then why worry about driving and following the rules of the road? This organization, like I said, has been around for about 17 years, but it's not one that, you listen to the name, Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability. It's a little bit of a mouthful, and it's not a household name. I don't know that everybody knows about it.
I
that was really,
I did not
and
know
that was
about
one
it.
of the reasons that we decided to do this story, was to raise attention to something that's there and has been there for a long time.
Well, and then that's kind of then to my next question of, we've talked about, as you mentioned at the top of the podcast, reckless driving as a whole, as a problem in the city. And we typically talk about, we see the videos of it. We talk to people maybe that are victims of a reckless driver, or we try to find those reckless drivers. So what prompted you then to look into this program specifically?
So we had done a story earlier this year about an unlicensed or revoked driver, revoked driver named Quentin Ward. You may remember he was involved in a hit and run, and he took off from the scene, repainted his car, gets stopped a few months later in the same vehicle, again driving very recklessly and carelessly, and ends up being arrested and charged with his hit and run. And then after the hit and run, he stopped another 7 or 8 times, and every time he gives a different excuse, or actually the same excuse. He gives the same, that's sort of stood out about that story. He kept giving the same excuse and over. It's not registered because we just bought the car. My girlfriend just bought the car 2 weeks ago. Well, 7 different times she bought the car 2 weeks ago. Or I'm on the way to the hospital to get my grandma, or on the way to the hospital because of my uncle. So he was a particularly egregious case. And we focused on the fact that he was someone who never had a valid license this entire time, but it never rose to the level of a criminal offense to drive without a valid license. And so you had people saying, we need to get tougher on this. And there are elected officials in Milwaukee who are saying, we're fed up. The public is fed up. We need to get tougher. After that story aired, I was contacted by Clarence Johnson, who is president and CEO of Wisconsin Community Services. It's a nonprofit organization that serves people who have interactions with the justice system in Milwaukee County in particular. They are a contractor here and have been for a long time. Within that is this Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability. And he reached out and said, when it comes to unlicensed drivers, when it comes to suspended and revoked drivers, not all of them are dangerous. Not all of them are out there creating havoc. Some are caught in a system they can't get out of. And we'd like you to tell our story. And that's what started this out.
It's interesting. We look at people's records all the time on CCAP, and I often see, driving while revoked on there. And I always assumed that people had done something reckless to get that, but you're saying it might just be unpaid fines.
Revocation many times does mean someone maybe has been doing something a little more serious. Licenses can be revoked for a variety of reasons, an accumulation of points. It can be for drunk driving. It can be for a number of things. Suspensions in particular are where you really see people who may simply have just had a fine that wasn't paid. Wisconsin is one of a number of states that still does what's called debt-based suspensions. And we didn't really talk about that in the story that aired on this Center for License Recovery on Fox 6. But it is a big piece of this because Wisconsin uses debt collection as a way to, or uses suspension rather, of licenses as a way to collect unpaid fines for traffic citations. There was a study by the University of Wisconsin, a couple of graduate students that was done looking at whether or not this is actually the most effective way to get people to pay their tickets. If suspending a driver's license really helps you collect more money. And in doing their research, now I grant you, if you looked through their papers, there was a long list of math and equations that were way beyond my understanding. They had to take a lot of data sets that were incomplete, or they had to make a lot of assumptions. But in the end, they came up with a figure of $200 million a year that the state is missing out on because they're using driver's license suspensions as the mechanism for collecting debts. It's not a very effective way to collect debts, because what you end up with is people like some of the people we featured in the story who say, I can't afford it, and now it gets more and more expensive. Maybe I got pulled over originally for speeding, but then I get pulled over and given a ticket for operating while suspended or non-registration of my vehicle, and then those tickets mount, and I'm just caught in a debt cycle. They don't end up paying that debt. They say, the grad students who put this paper together say there are better ways to collect that debt, including using things like tax intercept. Using the Department of Revenue's debt collection processes is actually more effective than suspending people for an unpaid fine rather than something that was truly dangerous.
So then we've talked about those dangerous, reckless drivers. We've talked about the ones that maybe can't afford the fines or citations, and then that prompts a suspension or revocation. How do you separate those two groups?
I think that's been one of the long-standing things that I've seen as a reporter in Milwaukee for 20 years now, that the system has done a terrible job of, is separating those two groups. If you look at, and I've got somewhere here, let's see if I can pull this thing out. The state Department of Transportation every year, and I know you can't see this if you're watching the video, it's a paper, but I will tell you that they publish something every year called Revocations or Suspensions by Reason of Conviction. So this is for last year, 2023. And every single year, at the top of that list, again, I'll hold it up. I don't know if you can see. You probably can't. But at the very top of that list is, I'm on the wrong page. Where's my third page? That was number 47. Here we go. Number 1 at the top of this page is failure to pay forfeiture. So 138,957 people in the state of Wisconsin last year had their driver's license suspended because they didn't pay a previous fine. Now, here's why it's so challenging. Was that initial fine for something dangerous? It might have been. So it doesn't mean that that's 138,000 people who aren't dangerous, but it doesn't mean that they are. And in fact, in many cases, it might have been a minor traffic violation that any one of us would have paid a small fine and moved on. But that's the number one reason. Far and away, 46% of all license suspensions are due to failure to pay a fine. The next highest reason is a driver's record, which is someone who's repeatedly driving and violating the rules of the road. 49,000 people, 16% of license suspensions for a driver's record. And then there's OWI and blood alcohol concentration and all sorts of other reasons.
Seems like it drops
speeding
kind
and so
of
on.
quickly,
It does.
It's like a big chunk, and then
What it means is you have this giant population of people, and we said at the beginning of this that 4% of all licensed drivers in Milwaukee County currently have a suspended or revoked license, or at any given time roughly do. And maybe 4% doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 22,000 people. That's tens of thousands, basically half the size of American Family Field. You could fill the stands with people. And how many of them are driving illegally, we don't know. Right. But within that population, some of them are dangerous drivers and many of them aren't. But there's nothing really in the system that separates them. So when you start talking about public policy to crack down on dangerous drivers, if you do that, you risk also making criminals out of people who are simply poor. And that's where I think the real challenge comes in with making policy to deal with reckless driving.
And a lot of your story focused on the license recovery program. How does that work in action if someone goes to them and is interested in recovering?
It's a good question. So if you do find out about the program and you go there, they start with an initial assessment. Essentially, they have someone, a caseworker, a case manager, who will pull your driving record and say, let's get a picture of what you're really facing. Because many times these are people who don't know. They're not keeping track of this in a spreadsheet at home. They just know I've got a bunch of tickets out there and I know some of them are years old and I don't know how many there are or how much I owe. So the first job is let's look at the big picture. They pull the driving record and they see, okay, you have these fines here and you have this there and this is what it's going to take. And the next step, once they pull that driving record and do the assessment, is they send it to a lawyer for it is Legal Action of Wisconsin, who works with them, a partner of the organization. And that lawyer will then say, all right, I'm going to contact these courts. And maybe it's Milwaukee Municipal Court. Maybe it's West Dallas Municipal Court. Maybe it's any other. And they contact them and say, okay, here's my client's situation. They represent them. And here's my client's situation. Can we get the fine reduced? Is there an alternative to paying this fine? And it might be that alternative is community service. Are there other ways that we can negotiate this down to something so that, and then once they come up with a plan, they meet with the client and say, okay, here's the plan. There is no amnesty here. There is no, we're going to wipe all the tickets away. It's how can we negotiate a plan that's realistic, and you're going to have to start paying this amount. And then going forward, if you do this community service, you pay this amount at a certain point in time, we're going to get you your license back. There is no wave of the magic wand and the license comes
So
back.
that's part of what the participant, though, has to do is the community service, start chipping away.
Yeah, they've got to be invested in this. This is not, as I said, I think it's important to point out that this is not a free pass to say, we're going to waive all your tickets away and get you back on the road, especially if you're dealing with someone who might be a dangerous driver. That's the last thing you'd want to do. These are people who have to have an investment in this, but it's giving them a plan that seems possible.
How long could that take to carry out?
Well, we have a guest who's going to be coming on later who can tell us a little bit about that. But my understanding is that can take months. It can take many months. For some, maybe it could take more than a year. I don't know what their typical process is, but it is not overnight. That much I do know.
So what are, you showed a gentleman in your story who was scrubbing the graffiti off the wall as part of his community service. Can you tell us a bit about his experience?
That's right. Dante Williams was one of the people. So when we did the story, the Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability had a table full of people. And they wanted to tell us all about it. So we had a conference room full of people. And here's this, many of them are in suits or they've dressed up. They look good for this. And here comes a Dante Williams who's wearing his best sweater and he's there with his wife and he can't wait to tell his story because Dante is 44 years old, now 45. At the time he's 44, had never had a driver's license in his life. And he'd gotten in some trouble, and he'd, had some of his driving wasn't the best. He wasn't a repeat reckless driver, but he'd racked up some tickets over the years. And he's got children and he's got a family, and he says, look, I've got to get the kids to school. I've got to get to work. I want to be legal. Yeah. And so he goes through this process, and as he sat down, he showed us, I asked him, I said, do you have your driver's license now? Yeah, I do. Is it on you? And he couldn't have put his hand in his pocket.
I was going to say, he was probably
enough.
really quick to.
He got the license out, and he showed it off, and he held it up to the camera, and he said, proud owner of my first license. At 44 years old, the first time he was ever legal. And I asked him, how does that make a difference in terms of the way you drive? And what he said, and I don't even know if this was in the story, but he said, I don't have to drive all the time worried if that's a police officer over my shoulder. I can just focus on the road. And you could see the pride he had in that. And I'm sure for the people in this program, that's what they want to give people, is that pride of accomplishment, that sense of I have something now. And he said it makes him a better driver because he has something to lose.
Right.
He never had a license before. Now he's got something, and he doesn't want to give that up.
Well, and he's aware of the impact it will have on his life and the benefit to him and his family if he's able to drive legally.
Absolutely.
I thought that was a really compelling interview. So how does this make our roads safer in general? I have to imagine it helps.
That's a good question. Whether or not this program makes the roads safer, I think is debatable. Whether it's helping individual people who need to get to work, who might need a license for a job, or there are a number of other reasons. One of the people we interviewed in the story, Kenyatta Taylor, said she just wanted to borrow family members' cars, and they said, we can't trust you. You don't have a license. Yeah. So she went through this process. She's got a valid license, and now she can borrow family members' cars because they feel better that they're giving it to a licensed driver. They're worried maybe my car gets towed away or taken away because you're out there driving it illegally. Now she feels better about that. So as you can imagine, the program wants people to know all about this, right? They want more people to know, but there's sort of a catch, because the more people who find out, well, there's one problem with telling more people about it. We're going to talk about that when we come right back. Welcome back to Open Record. So I mentioned 17 years ago, the Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability began. After nearly 2 decades, its existence is still relatively low profile. The president of WCS says it needs to be better known, but then he also says they can't afford to help more people because they don't have the funding for that. So on the one hand, they want to get the word out, and on the other hand, if they get the word out to too many people, they really can't help all of them. So it's kind of a catch-22.
Well, and one of the things that's real hot right now, those QR codes, we do them a lot at FOX6. You see them everywhere. They're on commercials. And they have a QR code. So, that's one of the ways to get the word out, right? So
I asked them, how do you tell people about this? How do people find out? And many times it's through referrals, maybe through another government agency. But they also have flyers. They have these kind of postcards. And I said, they had one at the table. Oh, can I take that? Sure, you can take that. And it had a QR code on the back of the postcard. Maybe I didn't get it that day. I think I got it another day from when we went to watch the case manager work. But in any case, she hands me one of these cards, and I scanned the QR code to see if I was someone who was interested, what would happen. And what popped up on the screen was, we don't have the staffing right now to take appointments this way. So you're going to have to call and this number and that sort of thing. And for whatever it was, I thought of if I was a person who was already on the fence, thinking, I don't know if I want to do this. And I go, okay, I'm going to scan the QR code, and it says, can't help you right now. I might be done. I might go away. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with the fact that they simply don't have the funding and the staffing to be there for everyone at all times. And I don't say that as a criticism. I think they are helping a tremendous number of people. If you look at their statistics, considering the funding they have, and let me talk about what that is. Their funding is about $330,000 a year, roughly.
And where's it coming from?
It's a mixture, public and private sources. City of Milwaukee puts in about $150,000 in federal block grant money that's passed through. There's a little bit that comes from the county. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then there's private fundraising that's done as well. But that's enough to pay for a couple of these case managers and for some of the legal assistance. But, legal assistance isn't cheap. And then, of course, they have to have a space. So some of that money is actually sort of it's not actually direct cash. It's the value of the space that's being donated. They have offices inside MATC, so that's part of the donation. It's not like there's a bright gleaming center for driver's license recovery employability with a big fancy sign outside. It's an office inside the MATC Student Center. If you didn't know it was there, you would never know to go there. So you need to find out and be told. You might be a student who happens to pass by and see a small placard that's in the glass down at the bottom near the floor that says license recovery or driver's license recovery. So beyond that, it's really a matter of what do they do with that limited amount of money? Well, they are helping about 100 people roughly per year to get a license, and then another maybe 300 or so who they help who don't actually sign up for the program, but who maybe get advice or assistance or guidance that helps them go take care of these things on their own. So they're helping, let's say it's 400 or 500 people a year on a budget of $300 and some $1,000. You can decide whether or not that's a lot or a little, but could there are 22,000 people with these suspended or revoked licenses. 100 a year is in some ways a drop in the bucket. Now, out of that 22,000, how many care to actually
want to,
get a license,
right?
And how many would be eligible? That's another question. Who's eligible for this program? If you have a pending drunk driving case, you are not eligible. And I don't know, and I want to ask our guest when she comes on a little bit more about this, but what if it's not a drunk driving? What if you have a series of reckless driving citations? Are there certain things that make you ineligible or someone they just can't help? I don't know. We can ask her a little bit about that. But what I was told, what our guest did tell me earlier was they're here to help people who are suspended or revoked because of poverty, not because they're dangerous people.
Sure.
Did Mayor Johnson talk about this at all? This seems like a program that would be.
We did. So, what's interesting here is the city of Milwaukee is doing a lot in terms of putting money behind the reckless driving issue. Tens of millions of dollars on street engineering. They're adding police officers. He just spoke about his new budget. They're putting more police officers through the academy or recruits through the academy so they can actually beef up things like traffic enforcement. So that $150,000 compared to tens of millions may not sound like much, but they are the biggest contributor to this program. And when I interviewed him, he said, look, my administration, we're putting into this. He actually challenged private businesses, many of whom need potential employees with valid driver's licenses. They said, if you want a workforce, he's saying, maybe you consider contributing to this. Maybe you consider pitching in, and some of that is knowing the thing exists in the first place.
You mentioned that funding from Milwaukee County had dropped off. Could you explain that?
So when I looked at the data from over the last 7 or 8 years, it was very clear that there was one category of funding that had dropped off to almost nothing. Milwaukee County, for a number of years, contributed around $20,000 to $30,000 to this program, and in the last few years, it was around $1,000 or less. And I wondered what happened there and why the numbers were so specific. One year it was 700, one it was 1,600. That's a very specific number. So I reached out to the Center for Driver's License Recovery, and I also reached out to Milwaukee County. And initially, I was told by the License Recovery Office that, that they're not receiving the same funding. Or actually, maybe I didn't get theirs first. I think I talked to the county first. The county said, we've put the money out there. There's $20,000 available. They're just not using it. And, so you'll have to ask them. So I reached out to Clarence Johnson at WCS and said, WTF, what's going on? Why aren't you using the $20,000? I just came up with that. By the way.
I was going to say, did you?
Yeah. But why aren't you using the $20,000? And he said, well, we only can be reimbursed when they refer a client to us. So that $20,000 is set aside for a very specific program, which is a fatherhood program that is tied to the county's child support office. So men who are involved in this child support office, to keep them engaged in that system, to keep them engaged with their families, having a driver's license can be a piece of that. Right. So there's money available to help them go through the license recovery program. But for whatever reason, over the past few years, the county has not or the contractors, the vendors who work with the county on this program have not referred many people to the license recovery program. The county now says they are going to meet with those operators, those vendors, to discuss those referrals and why people aren't taking advantage of this. It could be that they're telling them and just no one's taking them up on it. Or it could be that that's become a low priority and they've not been making those referrals. That we don't know, but we do know that's a big reason for the drop off in the county funding is that it's specific to this fatherhood program and they're just not getting the referrals.
And what about the private fundraising? You mentioned that too.
Well, when we first did this interview, believe it or not, I did the interview with the people in this program all the way back in the spring. We didn't have the story until recently for a variety of other reasons. But when we did, they were just about to go to a fundraising dinner or a fundraising event that I think was being held at American Family Field. And I'm sure that they are doing what they can to try to raise money out of those things. How much they get from that, I don't know. They certainly say they would like to raise more. And that's where the mayor pointed to the business community and says this may be something for you because there's a benefit if you get more people who are not dangerous but just simply can't afford the fines.
Right.
Maybe you can get them a job if they could just get a legal driver's license so they can get to your place of work. So that's a piece that they're looking at as well. I think I want us to get our guest in here because she's been waiting a long time, and I think she can tell us a lot more about this program and about why it's beneficial for the greater public outside of the people that they help. And we are going to talk to Jay Tucker, who is one of the administrators of Community Reintegration Services for WCS and a part of this license recovery program. We'll talk to her when we come right back. Welcome back to Open Record, and we have a special guest with us this week. We say hello to Jay Tucker, Administrator for Wisconsin Community Services. Jay, thank you for being here on Open Record.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You are listed as a Community Reintegration Services Administrator. I want to start there. Tell us about that. What does that mean? What do you do?
So primarily what I do is I help support programming for citizens that are reintegrating back into society. They may be members of or a part of or impacted by the criminal legal system. And so we provide residential services as well as supportive services for those returning, as well as programming around people that may be impoverished or have low income that need other supportive services like driver's license recovery, which we're talking about today, workforce development, employment and training opportunities, vocational training opportunities for youth and adults, and then as well as just attending to, reintegrating individuals back into society that have been previously incarcerated.
Jay, when I did the last story on reckless driving, particularly looking at Quentin Ward, this repeat revoked driver, and I'm sure you and all of you at WCS see that the news coverage, the media coverage, the public policy discussions right now are so heavily focused on getting tougher on reckless drivers. The focus is on, for good reason, on reckless driving because it is a real problem in the community. When you watch that from your perspective, what are the things you're thinking of, and why did your boss, Clarence Johnson, decide to reach out to me?
Well, he decided to because what we have here is two distinct differences. So we do have, no one wants to be on the roads with unsafe drivers. I mean, we're all on the road driving every day to go to work, to get our kids to school. So reckless driving, people driving recklessly on the road is different from people being suspended and unable to drive for reasons of poverty, for reasons of their tickets being suspended, not being able to either get a promotion at a job or take their kids to daycare. So what we try to do is make that distinction, is that safe driving, but the difference between actually suspending people for reasons as they couldn't pay a ticket or a fine. So we want to make that distinct difference so that it doesn't get overshadowed. Both are very important. As you stated earlier in the segment, we've been fighting this fight for a long time to actually change legislation and policies to get it going. But because it's kind of being overshadowed, as it should be a little bit with the reckless driving and all the concern, we just want to make sure that that the community still knows there's two distinct differences and that we're out here to help those who are suspended for reasons that they can't pay the fines and the tickets.
Jay, I think a lot of people take their driver's license for granted. Once you get it as a teenager, you just keep renewing
keep it in your wallet. And you're like, all right,
yeah. You think everybody has one, but they don't. Why is that driver's license so important?
What we've really found and what actually the research has shown is that a driver's license is a work credential. I mean, you're hard pressed to find any job, especially, if you're a driving job, if you're working in the social services or human services field, that driving is required, either driving the company vehicle or even driving your own car to and from the work. As you stated, I mean, I've had my license many years, since 16 years ago. It was just something that you didn't even think about. It's a ID that you pull out when you're filling out a job application. So we really notice the significance when we pair it with workforce development and economic, like, why why aren't people getting to work? Why aren't people getting promoted? And the number one reason a lot of they've been telling us is that they don't have that work credential. And so we just want to highlight that as it's necessary now, especially with a lot of the jobs. You know, we're bringing back a lot of the jobs to the city, but a lot of jobs are in the outskirts. They're in the suburbs. They're 20 or 30 minutes away, and people need to get there, whether it's going to work or taking their kids to school. So again, it's taken for granted, but it's a really crucial credential that we need to have for people, just for everyday life.
So this program, can you walk us a little bit through the process? So if someone reaches out to you guys, what happens first, and then kind of how do you walk them down the path to getting their license back?
So we get referrals a number of different ways. So a lot of times you may get referrals either from our community partners, from the mayor's office, or just word of mouth from other people. So what happens is people will sign up for the services. And the thing to really, highlight is that you have to be qualified to reach these services, meaning you have to meet our income requirements, you have to be a Milwaukee County resident, and you have to have no pending criminal charges. So if you meet the eligibility requirements, a person comes through the door, they walk in, we assess their record. We pull their DOT driving record, and we really get to the root of why their license is suspended or revoked, and then begin to develop a plan. And then we do that plan alongside of the participant based upon what they can handle. So what they can handle may mean I need to be able to get this done in a certain number of months because maybe I need a promotion coming up, or maybe my license is suspended and I'm going to lose my job if I don't get this, or I got an opportunity that's away. So depending upon the amount of time and amount of work that they're able to put into it, and based upon what they're actually suspended for and where, as he stated previously, a lot of times we may have people that have tickets that may be in various courts. So a lot of times it's calling in different courts, calling different municipalities to be able to set up that plan. So, but again, it's the person understanding why their license is suspended or revoked. So, because in this, we want to get them back valid, but we also want to educate them so that this does not happen again. So then if there are financial constraints that have hindered them from paying these tickets, we also do financial literacy classes to help them get back on track.
And that's a requirement, right? Like if they're going to do this, they've got to take that class.
They got to take that class because, again, we don't want people to repeat the same mistakes, and we want to make sure that they're armed with the resources and education so that, one, they don't make it, but also they need to actually tell other people about it so that this does not happen again. So a person comes in, we assess their record, and then we pull up a plan, and then we say, based on the plan that we pull up, is this something that's doable? Is this something that you can work on? And then here's the time frame this can happen. And then once that happens, they meet with the legal representative to put everything into play. Because so the buy-in is from the participant wanting to get this done, and then us as a program helping them navigate the different systems to be able to get this done. Because it may seem simple on the outside, but when you're trying to go through this, if you're trying to get everything that you need to do done in your daily life, navigating those different course systems, all the paperwork, all of those other things can be very daunting for a lot of families, especially if they have a lot of other responsibilities.
I know there was a review that the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee did years ago of this program early on, where they looked at the population it was helping, and they said that 92% of the people in the program were extremely low income, 89% minorities, 28% were people with jail or prison records, and combined they owed nearly $800,000 in fines to 60 different court systems. I bring that up to say, when you're talking about the navigation of these systems, people who are extremely low income, as I mentioned earlier, they aren't at home keeping track of their tickets in a spreadsheet on their new Mac laptop. These are people many times who are just trying to get by day to day. So how important is it just to do the sort of the management of putting the plan together and actually putting together what all of their tickets are and what all of their fines are and where they all are? How important is that to getting them on the path to getting a license?
That is a very important piece because, as you stated, we may have people that may have issues that may vary across multiple courts. So we'll have that initial assessment where we go through everything to see the reason for suspension. But then it may be another day or two, even after that initial meeting, where the case managers go in because they're calling the different courts and different municipalities to get the actual fine amounts. Because, as you stated, they're not sitting at home with a spreadsheet, or a lot of times they've moved. and a lot of different mail and different other things have went to other addresses. Actually, they're just not sure. They're not even sure even how to navigate the online system to check if their record is suspended or revoked. So a lot of times this comes to a full head when they're in the midst of a crisis, when they're in the midst of, trying to get that new job, or they've in the midst of getting pulled over while they have their kids in the car on their way taking them to school because they're driving with that suspension. So that initial piece is very crucial to kind of go through that. And sometimes it could take a couple of days just depending upon the different municipalities, but at least we have a clear record. The client knows where they stand, and then we know how to best help them based upon what's going on.
Jay, I'm sorry. There's one thing I do want to ask, because social media has changed the way news stories are perceived, or we never used to hear what the audience thought. Now we hear what they think and sometimes they tell us all sorts of things we never wanted to hear. But I want you to give you a chance to respond to this, because there were some comments on this story when it aired on our FOX6 social media page, on our Facebook page. And I'll give you a few examples. It costs $0 to abide by the rules of the road and maintain a clean record. This is an individual's problem. Everyone else shouldn't have to subsidize them through their taxes. And then there's one that was particularly, I thought, egregious. If he can afford all those gold teeth, referring to Dante Williams, he can afford to pay his tickets and get a license. I don't want my tax dollars to go to this program. We saw a lot of that. What do you say to people who view this program through that lens?
Mm-hmm. And I think, I've heard those comments before too. And the piece that they're missing is that those are people who've never had to, probably they get a ticket in the mail and they're just able to pay it. They haven't had to make a decision between, paying this ticket, paying rent, or paying this ticket and getting groceries. A lot of people who make those judgment decisions haven't had to be in that case. So when the people that come to us, the people that work with us every day, are the people who are in crisis, the people who don't have the funds, the people who are making minimum wage, the people that are just barely making enough to meet their basic necessities. And so sometimes they may get pulled over for a non-reckless traffic violation. So if I've gotten pulled over because maybe my tail light is out and I'm waiting to get it fixed, maybe when I get to my next payday, when I have availability, and I get a ticket in between then, now I still have to get my light fixed, I still have to get this ticket, and I still have all of the life things that I need to take care of as far as rent, groceries, and everything else. What I say to that is that when you have means and resources, it's easy to make that judgment and say that, oh, well, just pull yourself up by the bootstraps, just take care of this. But that's not every person's situation. As you can tell by the numbers that you mentioned, we have, like I said, over 22,000 people and more that have this, and they don't fall in that category when we look at it from an economic development standpoint. So when you have things that snowball, and these are situations that have gotten out of control for people, they need that resource and they need that help. So that's why, again, stories like this are important, because we want to make a distinction between people driving recklessly and people that have gotten suspensions for reasons of poverty. There should be no reason that nobody should be able to not have a valid license because maybe they didn't pay a non-traffic related ticket. It should be for reasons, that may be unsafe, not for reasons of poverty. And that's why we're here. And that's the message that we want to continue to get out. And those are the stories that we want to tell from the clientele that we have. We aren't, working with people that have the means and have the resources. These are people that don't have a way.
Speaking of that distinction between people who are dangerous on the road and people who can't afford to pay the tickets, what do you do if someone comes to you and they have a significant record of driving dangerously? Would they be disqualified?
Yeah, so one of the qualifications is no pending or criminal charges on your record. So basically, all of those things have to be taken care of. So the people that we are working with are people that have suspensions or revocations for not for those reasons. So as we stated, if people come to us, and it does happen, they have some pending criminal legal cases. A lot of times for other reckless driving, then we point them in the direction of getting other resources to be able to handle it. But they wouldn't be a person that will qualify for this program. Now, what we do see sometimes is we see people that may be habitual traffic offenders. And so when that happens, then they are directed as a part of our program to take the traffic safety course. So again, this isn't a free for all, just getting your license, just giving it to everybody. In addition to helping people get their license, we give them the resources and the education. So if there was any type of traffic offenses that happened to a person that suspended or revoked their license, the education piece and those workshops must be done first before we begin the next steps of getting their license back to them. Because again, we want the same goal too of having safe, valid drivers on the road.
Jay, I want to give you, this is the last question I want to ask before we got to go, and that is, you've seen it over and over again when someone like Dante gets that license for the first time. Can you talk about when you watch the process? I don't know, we didn't establish how long this process takes, but after many months, when you see someone like Dante get a driver's license for the first time, what is that like for you to see that moment?
It's very rewarding because some of the parts that you don't see is that this comes full circle for a lot of individuals. So, persons like Dante having that license, even it is for the first time, is, as you saw, he brought his whole family with it because this is something that affects his whole family. This is one of the things that, I can now drive down the street and don't have to have that fear, that edge on my shoulder when I'm taking my kids to school or when I'm driving to work. So the feeling that is very rewarding for us, and this is why we do the work, because all of these things, as simple as a driver's license sounds, it can affect many aspects of your life. And so it comes full circle to see the family when everybody is doing things legally, doing things within the law, and they don't have that fear and anxiety, and they can go about their day. So, in a perfect world, we would be, we're trying to work ourselves out of a job because this, suspending people for poverty wouldn't even be an issue. But we're here today. And so the families that need us, that need this resource because they have nowhere else to turn, we're going to continue to be here.
All right, Jay Tucker, Wisconsin Community Services, part of the Center for Driver's License Recovery and Employability. Thank you so much for your time here on Open Record. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, we will go off the record when we come right back. And it's time for us to go off the record. I make sure to jump the way I said that. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering your question, for which we have done absolutely no preparation, unless your name is Sarah Smith.
That's right. I saw this last night and I went, this is a great off the record question. Okay. We all are on our phones like all the time, right? Doing stuff.
Sure.
And okay.
What?
Okay.
No.
What's too big of a purchase to do on your phone? Like, what's something that you're like, oh no, I got to pull out my laptop or go to a computer to do this?
I shouldn't answer this question
Do you have an answer?
because I bought my car on my phone.
What?
Did you?
On your phone? Wow,
That-
impressive.
Explain. How did that happen?
So we bought a Tesla for our car, and you can't go and buy it in the store. You can, but you still
Is it like Hasselblad
they
mattress?
sit there with you and they go on the app and you buy it on the app.
What?
Yep.
No.
Yes.
So you didn't have to press vending machine buttons as it comes down a thing? Because that's what I was...
No,
What?
but
Like an elevator.
Like B12, and then
Yeah.
Right.
and then it gets
What?
stuck in there. The car's stuck in the...
Okay. That's a
Yes.
wow.
For me, plane tickets. I'd rather buy plane tickets on a computer
Yes.
than on my cell phone, just because I don't want to miss anything or click the wrong
Yes.
date.
Yeah.
And
Or like
something
something
small.
pops up and you're like, oh, now I just
want
booked plane tickets to
full
Phoenix.
screen.
Yeah.
Just
Right.
last night,
Wrong airport.
It's
Yeah.
it's the prime big deal
Oh,
days or whatever
yeah.
it is, and we were looking at a new dehumidifier for our basement because the old one we've had for
Yeah.
years stopped working. And I you guys won't be surprised. I wanted to compare Energy Star ratings and other things,
Sure.
and I was like, I can't do this on my phone. The screen's too small, so I went to the computer.
You want to like
That-
make several
yeah.
windows.
That wasn't necessarily because of the price of the purchase, though.
No.
It was more because the info I wanted was easier with
yeah.
multiple tabs
Right.
on a desktop with a big
That's fair.
screen. So
Yeah,
how about
that's
you?
fair. I feel like I'm kind of like with the price comparison stuff. I feel that way about hotels.
Yeah.
Like if I have to book hotels, I don't want to, unless I know specifically where I'm going. But even then, I'm like, I feel better when I can have 3 windows open and I can double check where my flight's coming in and what time. So I feel like hotels probably rank up there, but
Right. There's a lot I'm comfortable buying on my phone.
Absolutely.
But I think all those things. Maybe the dehumidifier. I think I'd be comfortable buying.
Well, like I said, I need it. So I learned this. I didn't know this before, but like dehumidifiers are tested in different temperature and humidity conditions. And so when they tell you they take this many pints per day or whatever, it's apples and oranges unless you go to the Energy Star site where you can get apples to apples. And I was doing my research. It was a lot of work.
In your dehumidifier, do you have the tube going right to the drain?
We do.
100%.
It is so
Absolutely.
great.
Okay.
Not having to empty that big
Yes, but also,
tray.
isn't there something really satisfying about opening up that tray and seeing all that water?
No, when I worked in radio many years ago, it was my job as the overnight person to empty the dehumidifier.
Sloshing all around.
I'm still traumatized by that because it was one of my nightly duties. I had to carry the big jug over, and so I don't just right to the drain. That's
Right
the way
to it.
All right. Well, I think that's going to be it for Off the Record. We will take a break and wrap things up when we come right back. All right. Well, we are going to wrap things up. What's that
You really
funny?
paused like you didn't know what to do next.
I wasn't sure how I wanted to start that. Anyway, it feels like today flew by. I don't know. It's just where
I
the
know.
time
It's
flies.
great.
Maybe
Good
it's 'cause I have a
topic.
lot to do. Anyway, if you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. As always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible. Jenna, Sarah, thank you. And that also includes our editor, Dave Machuda, and our chief photographer, Cale Zimney. With that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.